Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 337. Hey everybody! So, here we are, the chapter where we catch Aoyama. So, general notes, I think it's a relatively simple chapter, especially because we're doing a lot of, trying to redeem Aoyama or like say it to Aoyama that he can still be viable as a hero and all that kind of stuff. I do think it ends up being relatively simple, and it ultimately makes it, I think, relatively easy to talk about. So I don't think we're going to be here for too long. Now, personally, I wish I liked Aoyama more, but I don't care about him too much. And there is something that occurs in the chapter that makes me, kind of step away even more from that. I think I care less about the situation when you see how I'm going to frame this. I care a little bit less about the situation because it's a little bit ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to feel sympathy for this particular situation. I think Horikoshi knows what he's doing in this thing too. So I really appreciate it. And I will say though, the entire capture sequence and one of the lines that Izuku has during the capture sequence, I thought was really, really good. And there is a lot of little details that I think are extremely worthwhile, and there are still a few points that leave some questions here. But overall, I think it's a simple chapter, and in the chapter we also get to see Hagakure's face. Now this is going to be relatively important because Hagakure's face, I never really thought about it, but you could think about it as one of the mysteries of Hero Academia. And here it was revealed through this whole thing with the smoke explosion or whatever. Hagakure's face, yeah, we got it. So this is pretty much an indicator of, yeah, this is another plot element that we now don't have to worry about. So if we're going towards the ending of Hero Academia, well, yeah, I guess this was a mystery that we wanted to know. So this is one of those things that's indicative of, yeah, we are approaching the end. I really don't think Hero Academia is going to go past 500. It's questionable whether it will go past 450. Anyway, let's get into the chapter proper. It's overall, I think, a solid chapter. I thought the art was good, and I have no bigger things to say. But there are a lot of little details that come out of the page-by-page walkthrough. So, let's get into it. Starting off with page 1 and page 2. So these two, I think, need to be taken in conjunction because that's where the value of these two pages lie. So first page picks up right where it left off with the villains, Dobby and All For One talking about friends. And All For One talking about what he thinks about friends and what he does with friends. Now, one of the critical lines for page 1, I just want to point out, is he talks about like, oh yeah, if they fail, it's like, oh well, that's too bad. And then he moves on to the next viable route for his plan. Now, this is calling back to the whole thing about how he plans out his life. And when you look at the imagery for how he makes his plans, there's a lot of failed routes because a lot of the routes don't take him to where he goes. When we were talking about that in the previous chapters, I said the good thing about All For One is that he doesn't really dwell on his failures for too long. This is another point where the author is just saying like, yes, this is true. He is reinforcing a previous fact. So this is extremely consistent with All For One, and it is really nice to see. Now, other little details for the page before we move on. It's nice to see that Spinner is the one that cares for Shigaraki. This is one of those things where if Shigaraki's going to do something to All For One, this would be the moment to have Shigaraki whisper something to Spinner when All For One's not noticing. But also, given that the vestige is inside of Shigaraki, there's really no way for Shigaraki to plan anything without All For One finding out. But good to see Spinner there. Unfortunate that we did not see Toga. I do wonder if Toga is still there or if that was a mistake in the last chapter. But probably Toga is there. Anyway, we got to move on to page 2 because this is where the thing is important. So, remember what occurs in page 1. When my friends succeed, I rejoice. He's calling them friends. But when you go into page 2, they're less like friends and more like disposable tools. So, do you see what's kind of happening here? All For One has been known to contradict himself in the span of one page. And that's pretty much what happens across page 1 and page 2. It's actually pretty cool to see it in real time. Now, what's happening here, this is a manifestation of All For One talking in niceties. This is a manifestation of All For One using kind words to describe really bad situations. So, again, listen to how crazy, or not how crazy this is. Listen to how All For One speaks. When my friends succeed, I rejoice. Should they fail, I think, oh, what a shame. And after that, and after that brief disappointment, I move on to the next viable route for my plan. They're less like friends and more like disposable tools. What's happening here is this is consistent with All For One contradicting himself. This is consistent with All For One speaking in niceties. What's happening here is that when someone actually calls All For One out on his niceties, like Dobby did, that's where the whole thing falls apart and you have the seeming contradiction appear. What's really just occurring is that All For One cannot speak about niceties in prolonged conversation because it all falls apart. So with All For One in this case, he doesn't have friends. They're just disposable tools. That's the overall thing. What just happened here is that All For One had to explain to Dobby how this actually works. Now, in the same panel, what's really cool is that you see another manifestation of All For One speaking in niceties. He says, "Hip hip hooray for any slight excitement they can inflict." The contradiction is in excitement and inflict, and it's bolded, so there is importance there. That's ultimately Horikoshi just saying, hey, really, look at how he talks. First off, excitement is not inflicted. Inflicted fundamentally is a damaging word. It's a negative word. You don't put excitement and inflict. Excitement here is flat out how much pain they can inflict. So ultimately what you have here is a pretty great expression of the issues, or not the issues, the facets of All For One's personality. In one page, you have the contradictions, or pretty much the breakdown of niceties, and then you have the reminder of, yeah, this is how he speaks in niceties. He uses certain words that paint a prettier picture than what it is. And in this case, like when you have it superimposed on Izuku, the excitement is, well, he's ultimately about to try and hurt Izuku. So that's something that could work for All For One's plans. Anyway, page 2 is them running away. Is there anything valuable on page 3? Actually, yes. There's something incredibly valuable on page 3, and what you're going to see with the following things is ultimately, like, Horikoshi is a master of dialogue when it comes to doing certain things, and he's also a master of he's a master of presenting very unique situations. So, here is the thing. Aoyama's whole thing is centered on he wants to do good for his family. He wants his family to be happy. Alright? One of the first things we're told here, both of you came from wealthy, privileged families and never wanted for anything in your own upbringings. And the two of you fretted over my being different from the other children even more than I did. That's why, hoping against all hope and wishing only for my happiness, you dared to believe a dubious rumor. So this whole thing is just Aoyama setting up, oh, my parents were victims and they did everything for me. They ultimately just wanted me to be happy. That's why they go to All For One. But, again, it's the first little bit. They are from wealthy, privileged families. So, you want me to feel bad for the rich people who, when for the first time they encounter adversity and do not get what they want, that being a child that is like all the other reindeer, I am supposed to feel bad for them. Again, I'm supposed to feel bad for wealthy people who, when they did not get what they want for maybe the first time in their lives, went and made a deal with a very dubious man. In a world where there are people whose quirk is zooming into things and super hearing, in a world where there is technology that lets people do amazing things like Ochako's whips that seem to defy all logic, and Aizawa's binding tape that moves like it's magic, I'm supposed to feel bad for you. Why not just outfit Aoyama with incredible technology? Anyway, you get the point, right? So this is like the big thing here. And actually, this characterization makes a lot of sense, because like when you look at the character, like when you look at Aoyama's parents, like they have some compromised qualities, and when you look at the way that Aoyama is presenting the entire situation, yeah, he's just glossing over. Well, like what he's doing is that he's saying that, oh, because they were so happy, because they were so well off, they should have continued being super well off and not having to face any adversity that maybe the normal common folk do. So really, the whole thing revolves around Aoyama highlighting how pained his loving parents were, and in a way glossing over the fact that in pretty much every other aspect of their life, they were pretty happy. So you go on to page 4, the quirk was not fitted for Aoyama's body, and then you have Aoyama pointing out, oh, they were grappling with their own angst as they raised him. Man, I cannot imagine what it's like to be angsty within. Let me just check. That looks like a pretty nice mansion. Is that a rose garden? Roses are really hard to grow. Yo, is that stained glass on the doors? Double doors. Wow, I cannot imagine what it's like to be angsty in that kind of garden. But yeah, sure, you know, they feared him being different, and I'm sure that fear, for people who have probably never encountered adversity, I'm sure that fear probably really ate away at them. Now, mind you, I am being a little bit aggressive here, but it is actually really cool how the author kind of presents this, and how he moves Aoyama to focusing on the pain of the parents, even though in the grand scheme of things, these people, again, are super well off, and they're really making a big issue of the one thing that didn't go their way from what we are being presented here. So after that, we go into another line that's just indicative of how warped the situation is, when he says that my dream came from the desire to conform. Now, again, really interesting. And ultimately, when you look at these parents, like, that is the theme for the parents. They wanted him to be the same. And, you know, it is also ironic that Aoyama, he wanted to conform in the sense that he had a quirk like everyone else. But at the same time, it's Aoyama is he stands out so much. So there is a little bit of a contradiction there. There is a little bit of a paradox there. But it really works out depending on where exactly your perspective is. Like, if you see it from the perspective of, like, oh, when he says conform, he means be like everyone else in that they have a quirk. Yeah, you know, it all makes sense. But when you look at it in practicality, it's like, no, he stands out quite a lot. Anyway, you continue with Aoyama saying that he hoped to give to his parents as much as they had done for him. That's a really positive thing. We know how this is working. What it's saying is that ultimately Aoyama's eyes are centered on his parents. And then we go into the overlays of All for One and Aoyama's life, right? So we find out, okay, Aoyama went to UA because All Might was hired there. We have the time during USJ. Inform me when your class is going to be isolated. Now, this is still a very critical line, because did Aoyama know USJ was happening ahead of time? Because to make this work, Aoyama must have known that they were going to USJ a few days ahead, but I don't recall that time period. So I'm very invested in this. Unfortunately, I don't have time to check the old chapters as I'm recording this before having to go out. But I will be checking up on this, and maybe we'll talk about it next week. It's just still very interesting to me that the command for USJ was to tell him when they were going to be isolated. For this to work, Aoyama would need to tell them a few days before USJ for them to plan to go and get whatever they were doing on the day they broke down the walls or whatever. The other command we have is tell me location of your training camp. That's fine. And then we have the wonderful line of, now that Izuku is back at UA, lure him somewhere alone. Now, when he says lure him somewhere alone, the big question is, does he mean somewhere alone in the UA campus? Because that's kind of scary, because that could indicate that they have a way of getting into the campus immediately. Or does he mean somewhere outside of UA? I think luring him somewhere alone on the UA campus is a lot more reasonable for Aoyama's skill set. Now, we also have some superimposing going on this panel, where it's like acting in the service of others in pursuit of their happiness, giving of myself for everyone else's sake. So, you know, like, there's a bit of a corruption here. Like, that's still Aoyama's thinking. So you have, like, the positive thoughts being corrupted by All for One. But it's also really important, just remember that when he says giving of myself for everyone else's sake, it's not really everyone else's sake. It's just his parents' sake. This is extremely centered on his parents. And the entire chapter is a reaffirmation of this is extremely centered on his parents. Now, the next few pages, like the bottom of page 5, going into page 6 and page 7, Aoyama's attacking of Izuku. I think ultimately that was really nicely drawn. But the real interesting thing to me here is at page 7. Like, Aoyama's talking about he fell into utter despair. He elaborates on that later. But when you have Toru coming in there and refracting the laser, that was really cool. Now, what's really interesting here is that Horikoshi felt the need to have Toru say, like, my body lets me refract light. We know this. We've seen her do these kind of attacks before with Aoyama even. So I do think this had to be a little bit of just a reminder of what exactly Toru can do. Maybe for readers that haven't been paying attention, but I think the majority of people that watch YouTube videos are paying attention. Anyway, I actually really liked how Toru came in there pointing out we could have died, and now Japan sucks. And so I like how that ended off with her asking what was going through his head. So knowing the spoilers, I didn't know that I didn't realize that Toru was actually asking this question, but I'm glad that someone actually asked it. Because God, man, like the guy needs to answer this. So what you end up having here is that because Aoyama is so focused on his parents, like he's not actually giving a lot of answers about like this whole other situation at this point in time here. Anyway, we go into the capture sequence on page 9. And what's really great here, aside from the art, I think this is probably one of my favorite shots of him just being captured. I guess I should talk about the parents. They have it saying that our dear Yuga only ever screwed you guys over because he was trying to protect us. Yeah, okay. I get it, right? This is again another this one makes sense. Like it's the parents love the kid, right? Obviously, but they are ultimately very focused on Aoyama. Like these people are afraid of dying, and quite literally, people are dying all around them, right? And it's like, do you guys really think you'll still survive? And if you do survive, where do you guys think you're going to be surviving? They haven't really thought that far, and that's definitely one of those issues that is happening here with Aoyama. Again, it's like the limiting of the perspective. He's not looking that far ahead. In Aoyama's case, he's not looking far beyond his own parents. Now, Izuku, this is my favorite line. He tells Aoyama that Hagakure just did him a favor, and he elaborates, she doesn't want you hurting anyone else. So this line is just, the just did him a favor is pretty good, because what Izuku's pointing at here is that if Aoyama actually hurt Izuku, that's like a whole, like that's another step. Things become a lot harder at that point in time. That's why he's saying that she did him a favor. So it's actually really cool that Izuku is drawing a little bit of a line there, saying that there is something that could have happened that is so negative that it is good, that you get a real big positive from Toru acting. In Izuku's mind, he might be thinking like, if Aoyama actually hurt one of the other students, himself included, things get more complicated when it comes to maybe talking with the faculty. Page 10 ends up being a transition page where we go into page 11 and we have the families captured. It's kind of cool to actually see them all bound up. And in this shot, we have President Mike being one of the big people here, mostly because his hair takes up so much space. Now, I gotta say, what I really love here is seeing All Might's face. And, you know, when it comes to the whole All Might thing, we talk about how, you know, All Might said that they have the heart of a hero. And you could say, well, Aoyama still has the heart of a hero because he was trying to protect his parents. I would agree with you. Honestly, I would even try to fight it because it would be semantics at that point. But what's important to understand here is that All Might said, because they have the heart of a hero, they are not the traitor. What's occurring here, and this is why All Might ultimately has this face, is that I think All Might have forgotten how dangerous All for One can be. Because it doesn't seem like it occurred to him that All for One could be blackmailing one of the nice students into doing something they don't want to do. And that they aren't really equipped to know how to solve by themselves. So when you have All Might's face here, this wonderful, beautiful face, it's pretty much just another failing of All Might. That in this case, he didn't properly appreciate all the mechanisms that All for One has at his disposal. Now, one of the critical things that the author does here also is mention the whole thing about the exploding mechanism. For that, I think Tsukachi's guess is probably going to be right, but, you know, making an assumption that the explosion mechanism isn't here because the explosion hasn't occurred, sketchy. Because if All for One can monitor this in real time, he might just be holding off on the explosion until it's time to like really do the most damage possible. So that's something to keep in mind for the future. We kind of have to see what exactly the author wants to do there. Let's hope that this is going to be simple and, you know, fingers crossed, and this is exactly the way Tsukachi is saying it. Anyway, the kids have been called into this. They are not leaving. Shoto has a great face. Mineta's face is great. Mina's face is heartbreaking. Kaminari's face is great. Ochako is just glum. And I think Shoji looks surprised. So I like that the kids were told about this. And honestly, this is probably one of my favorite pages for the chapter. And on this page, my favorite panel is this one, where Ojiro's asking, yeah, actually, if Toru didn't catch him, what was he going to do? Well, we actually know. He was going to lure Izuku somewhere alone. Now, what I love about this panel is, of course, Ojiro is here. He's standing. His hand is actually between us and Hagakure, and Hagakure looks pretty, she looks like she's pretty close to Ojiro. What I'm really saying here, this is a wonderful shipping panel. This looks so adorable. It looks really, really adorable. It's actually really neat to see them so close together. It's actually really neat to see them that close. That it's neat. It's really neat. They're probably going to be an official pairing. That's really cool. Really cute. And I know they have like that team up missions chapter. It's just really cool to see it. Always makes me happy. Anyway, Bakugo makes a point about another quirkless person. Whatever. We move into page 13, which is pretty much the parents just explaining to us what exactly happens to people who defy him. Just reminding us, oh yeah, all for one. He doesn't have friends. What the author is really trying to accomplish on this page is just establish these people are very terrified. Okay, moving on to page 14. This is where Aoyama starts explaining in reference to the previous things that he set up in the chapter. So what you have on page 14 is actually a pretty nice bookend for the author. He set up questions at the beginning and he answers them towards the end of the chapter. Really appreciated. One thing to point out, though, is the fallacies that the father is engaging in. He says that Yuga had no way of knowing what happened each time he followed those orders. Okay, well that's deflecting because Aoyama is smart. After the first time, after he sees what happens the first time, where this guy sends in dozens of villains, I'm sure he could have had the simple thought of, oh, hey, if I let him know where the training camp is, yeah, well, he's probably just going to send us cupcakes. So just keep it in mind, that's a fallacy that's occurring here, but that's happening because the father just trying to deflect blame, trying to save Aoyama. That's totally fine. It makes sense. The emotionally stressful situation, just understand why it doesn't work. Next, we move on into Aoyama answering Toru's question with the author nicely reminding us what he's talking about. In this panel, in this explanation, you also see the shot of Ida, and Ida is there because of their moment, probably during joint training. Anyway, the rest of page 14 is essentially just the reason Aoyama sucks and his speech explaining that. At page 15, we begin Izuku's counter-argument, which is pointing out that one moment back in the forest. So another thing to keep in mind here is that there aren't actually that many moments to really use in this whole plot. We're, 330 chapters in? And at the end of the day, when it comes to the actual traitor moments, there's actually really only two. There's only two moments where the traitor is actually a thing. That being USJ and the summer camp. And then when it comes to the one counterpoint, it's only at the summer camp. What you have here is just, when it comes to the spots where you could pull out a traitor, there aren't that many. And one thing I want to say, especially in the case that Toru is in fact not a traitor, but we don't know, but probably 90% sure she isn't a traitor. There were other moments that the fandom had thought were traitor moments. Like, for instance, people kept saying that Toru told Shigaraki that he had been going into the mall instead of just accepting that everyone was there by coincidence. So one thing that's going to be really interesting about all of this when the dust has settled is really, are people going to go back and study their biases or study the logics that they employed in order to make other people a traitor? Because at the end of the day, if Toru isn't the traitor, there's a lot of faulty logic that's going on around there that's actually going to be pretty fun to kind of parse through, especially because a lot of the things that were happening if Toru isn't a traitor could just be explained by random circumstance and just misunderstanding of the girl's lines. But mind you, the author also made it unfairly obtuse, because 100% he was trying to divert attention, at least at this point. At this point, assuming everything is on the up and up when it comes to Toru, he was making things difficult for the readership. Anyway, page 16, we go into something I think that was really cool of Izuku saying that he didn't realize the SOS. Heck, I just wanted to believe that Aoyama was being weird. Wow, how wrong was I? But Izuku points out Aoyama probably has a good heart, and then he brings up Nagant. Now, this was going to be probably one of the final really interesting points for the chapter. When Izuku says, I happen to know a hero who got manipulated by him, it's really important to remind yourself of the asterisk, that being, I happen to know a hero who was put into a compromised situation because of our faulty society, who then, because of that compromised situation, was manipulatable by All For One. That's the full story when it comes to Nagant. Let's not forget it. Let's not brush that aside. Nagant was a product of her society, and then All For One took advantage of that. Anyway, Izuku makes the point that she didn't sell her whole soul. Yes, very true. She did not sell 100% of her soul, but probably 75%. Well, you know what? Semantics. What matters is the 1%, not the rest of the 99. I'm just being aggressive on Nagant, but you understand what Izuku's trying to say here. Izuku then says that doing wrong doesn't make you a villain for the rest of your life. That is largely correct. We understand the spirit of what Izuku is saying. One mistake, especially when you're being put in a bad situation by a literal mastermind, one mistake shouldn't be what sets the rest of your life. Mind you, there are people who doing one wrong, like really I wouldn't care less if they continue being called villains. Like for Toga, at this point Toga's done multiple wrongs. She had a peaceful life and then she threw it all away and continued doing wrong. I really don't mind if after all this is done, people like Shigaraki, Dobby, and Toga continue being called villains, even if they try to rehabilitate and try to do better. At this point they've done so much wrong that they should just take being called a villain as part of their redemption or rehabilitation at that point. Mind you, when it comes to Izuku, this is going to be really important. Izuku is going to go for the forgiveness angle. So what you have here with Izuku is actually really consistent with the character, which is good to see here. And this leads us into the whole thing of you can be a hero, Aoyama, and I'm sure Aoyama is still going to be a hero, and to take my hand. All really, really good imagery. We do have one thing, though, with Bakugo saying, Deku, I get it now. And it's in reference to, if nothing else, we can choose how to enter this fight. So, you know, is this going to actually lead into a plan next time? Because for me, it's like, if we have the trader, I don't think it's a brilliant idea to say, oh, we can use the trader to feed All For One bad information. Like, that should be the first thing that all the adults are thinking and not saying. So I don't think that's such a thought that should be identified like this. But at the same time, I do think that's probably what we're going to get next chapter, that being, oh, let's feed bad information to All For One. But when it comes to, if nothing else, we can choose how to enter this fight, and him saying, I get it now, I'm wondering if Bakugo is talking more about, I get it, we should enter this fight with a positive outlook, wanting to save villains, not defeat them. I wonder if that's what Bakugo is understanding now. So when it comes to like what exactly Bakugo is seeing here, I do think it's more likely that it might just be we can use Aoyama to control how we enter this fight. But I would like it if it also Bakugo realizing that, yeah, if we go into this fight thinking we can save people as opposed to beating them, maybe we'll have a different kind of outcome. And, I mean, for the people who are on All For One side, we know a good chunk of them are people who are like Spinner. And what would they like to hear? Maybe they'd like to hear that there is, in fact, support for them, that it's okay, that we will forgive this. You know, it's a crazy time. Let's just all work together. Let's build a better society. That kind of positive thing. I wouldn't be upset to get that next chapter. Anyway, guys, that's pretty much it for me. Solid chapter here, Academia. I think my favorite parts, Ojiro and Toru, that was really great, but also the beauty of All For One's first 2 pages. I thought that was really good. But yeah, guys, let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.